Hi RIT Baja designers, this is the advanced tutorial video for SolidWorks PDM. If you are a new designer and you haven't used WPDM before, I suggest you take a look at the beginner's tutorial video, which covers the purpose of PDM in general, just the basics of checking in and checking out documents, document ownership, document revisions, and then a couple part number and handling parts best practices. This video will focus on a few odds and ends that weren't covered in that one, including linked CAD and file trees, opening older revisions of parts, working locally or temporarily locally, changing projects, handling attachments, and then deleting files. So this will be more useful for designers who have used PDM before but have gotten stuck in a couple areas. It'll help speed things up. So I'm already logged into PDM as Driveline. The first thing I want to take a look at is understanding linked documents. So if I go to R13's Driveline, for example, and I click down on the Driveline assembly, you'll note that the reduction box and a few other assemblies have this tiny little demarcation next to them, a little arrow actually. And what that arrow is designating is that the actual CAD, as far as it's located in the structure of the file tree over here, is in a different location within Driveline, but it's also showing up under this Driveline assembly because the reduction box is part of the Driveline assembly. Let's say I was going to move the Driveline assembly to a different project. This and a couple other things, if I was also going to take ownership of it, you'll notice that the scope is introduced here, and the scope is first off always a selected item, but then I can also choose children, which will include either all of the parts that are in the Driveline assembly down to all the levels, or first level only, which would just be Driveline and then all the sub-assemblies you see in this first row next to it. The key here is, though, is do not move if document is a link. If I have that checked, then it won't move any of the projects that have that little different location or link demarcation. If I uncheck that, then it'll move the projects even though they're currently located in another place. If I did want to move this project, I could select a totally different folder, such as R16 brakes or something crazy, and it would move those locations within the file structure. One thing I mentioned a couple times in the beginner video, and one of the main benefits of PDM, is the fact that you can open up older versions of documents. So in designing this year's reduction box, let's say that I wanted to take a look at the original design or an older design that Joe Lacarte may have had in mind with the case halves. If I go ahead and open and check out that RIT case half, just like I normally would if I wanted to load the most recent version, I also have the option to open an old version. So if I click on revision, I can see A71 is the latest, but I can go back to every single time he checked that document in. So if I pick A17, just for example, you'll notice that this symbol changes to red, which means the version I'm trying to open is older than the version I have locally saved on my computer. When I click open/checkout for that, it'll ask me if I want to overwrite that local copy. If I'm trying to open an older revision of a file, then I have to click yes or yes to all in this case. Otherwise, I'll just open the most recent version that's already sitting open on my computer. So I'll hit yes to that. And then you can see here, we have a much different design for the RIT case half than you'll actually see on R13 or R14 or R15 for that matter. This is the version that he was working with at first and then changed the design obviously several times. So this is interesting for looking at old designs and how they evolved, but it's also good if you make a series of mistakes and you want to revert back to an old version, you can do that. If I wanted to revert back to this version and I had rights to it, I could actually save and check in, and then check in this version as a new revision, overwriting all the newer updates that have been made to it. Currently I don't have access to this because we've frozen all the R13 CAD. Now, sometimes it's tough to know where in that all those series of changes you actually want to look. That's where notes come in significant handy. If I go to R16 reduction, the top level assembly, and I choose the left case half, for example, if I right click on that, I can click document information, and then go to history/notes. and you'll see these notes on the rightmost side. That was when I did check-ins, typically that were big check-ins. I would make note of what changes I had made, and now I can go back through and see where I added reference geometry for FEA or improved fastener locations, or whatever the case may be. Those notes are really critical if you ever want to go back and check on something or go to an old version. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time just opening up different revisions and trying to figure out what you're actually working with. The next thing I want to discuss is a way to work locally or on separate tracks of CAD or to duplicate previous year's CAD. So all three of these things involve taking CAD from PDM, saving them somewhere locally on your computer so that you can work on them and they're no longer tied to PDM and you no longer have to worry about check-ins. Let's say, for example, that I want to make changes or work on R16's clutch roller assembly. If I go ahead and open or check out that roller assembly, there's a couple things I can do. First, let's say I want to work on it only locally. I don't want to deal with it on this computer. The best way to do that, especially for an assembly, is to do File, Pack and Go. What Pack and Go does is I can grab all the drawings, all the simulations, all the toolboxes, all the appearances, everything about the files, and save them in a new location. And not only am I able to save them in a new location on my computer, I'm also able to ensure that all the references maintain or stay intact with each other. Additionally, I can add a prefix or a suffix. I can select and replace parts of the names. So if I were grabbing a full assembly from R16, for example, I could change the name and search for 16 and replace that text with 17 in all the situations. So you could just copy last year's CAD and change all the part numbers and update those all the same. In the same way, if I wanted to make this version stay the same for R17, I could take this assembly and very easily in here change all these names to the part numbers that I actually want. Now, our part naming scheme for Baja is something that you'll be able to find in a couple other locations, but essentially it's the year, so 17 for this year. Then your system number for the clutches, that's 04. And then the remaining three numbers are totally up to the designer based on how you want to break down your system. It's a good idea to sketch that out. I know with reduction, we've got the top level, and then 200 is input shaft, 300 level is mid shaft, 400 level is output shaft, and then we increment 1, 2, 3, 4 on all those subparts of those sub-assemblies. It's good to get that ironed out early and make it clear so that someone later on can understand what you had in mind when you first did that. Once I did the pack and go, I would no longer have to worry about read-only tags on the files. Say I grabbed an R13 CAD, that read-only would go away because it would be a new file, and then I'd be able to save and check it in with full ownership in a new location with new part numbers if I wanted to. The next thing I want to discuss are different attachment types and attaching files in PDM. That can include simulation results, drawings, or really any other file that's on your computer. If you're wondering what simulation results look like within the file structure, you can see here under R16 reduction, I actually have an FEA version of the top level assembly. That's a version of the assembly just with the K-SABs that I use for doing FEA simulations on. So you can see there, attached underneath the name, are peakexcel.cwr and split peakexcel.cwr. If I go ahead and open and check that out, make sure I have the latest version. Yes to all. For simulations, I need to make sure that my simulation add-in is turned on. I usually leave the simulation add-in turned on or turned off for startup because it takes so long to load. Then I only turn it on when I need it. When I do that, you'll see Peak Excel and Fatigue 1 automatically show up in the bottom. The actual simulations, or this whole setup of the simulation, is something that's saved with a part file. So all you need to worry about when you're checking in is just the results documents. Currently the results documents aren't showing up. If I were to go ahead and run the results document, I could then add that to the file when I check it in. So if I do save and check in, and then save the document, first it'll query everything to see what's changed. Then if you see in the check-in, there's this find and include associated drawings or Cosmos files. Cosmos is the results from your simulations. So if right now it's not finding any Cosmos files because I haven't actually run this FEA locally on my computer since during the design season, but it will find those Cosmos files and then attach them like you saw previously. The next kind of attachment that's really common is doing a drawing. So I'm actually going to create a part and do a drawing all the way from the ground up. If I do a new part using the Baja part template, I'll just make a really sketchy nut, for example. You should never draw in SolidWorks and leave blue areas like I'm doing right now. That's a quick way to cause things to blow up on you later on in the CAD structure. Alright, so I have this part. Before I make the drawing, I need to actually save the part. When you save parts, you should always use the part numbering scheme. If you're not sure what the part's going to be or what it's going to do, then do some sort of placeholder at first, but make sure you always come back and do a part number, especially if you're going to make a drawing for it. So for this one, I'm just going to do 17-08 / TST for test. I'm going to add a description. Let's say I forgot to add a description, so I'm not going to add a description right now, and you'll see why that's important too later. Alright, so I have this part, it's got its part number. I can go to under the arrow next to new, say make drawing from part/assembly. I have the option for the A and B template. B is just a larger piece of paper, so I'll go with A. That's just a simple part. You can drag in the part. And then now we want to discuss real quickly how we populate the drawing information down here. So what it automatically does is pulls in drawing number from the name of the part. That's because I'm assuming that when you save a part, you are going to use our part naming structure, and that you're going to use the number as the name. So it'll pull drawing number as the number for the file. If I go back to the part, I can hit this properties button next to options. This is very critical. If I hit properties, then I can see the description and type nut in there. And then if I go back to the drawing, nut will be populated in the title. So it pulls the title or the name for the part from the description of the part. So that's really important. Additionally, you'll see material and finish are currently unpopulated. If I go on the part, I set the material to 304 stainless steel, and then I go back to the properties and add a finish to it. Those will also auto-populate in here. For quantity and drawn and check demarcations, you can double-click, and then these will all show up as options. Additionally, if you don't like the SolidWorks material that it's picking, you can change it here. If you want to type something other than a SolidWorks material, the way to do that is to right-click on Sheet, click Edit Sheet Format, double-click on the material, and instead of using the material code, you can just type in something totally different, something totally made up. That doesn't happen to be anything in SolidWorks. And then click out in the top right hand corner. Now it's no longer linked to a specific material property. So that's how you get everything set up in there. Likewise, revision, once you've checked something into PDM, the revision for the part will show up in the drawing. This is really crucial for checking later on and seeing what revision a drawing was made after. Before you can check in a part with a drawing, you need to save the drawing. I always do the same file type as the part, but you can also do an underscore afterwards if you've got different types of drawings you need to make, and we'll talk about that in a second in relation to the input shaft. So now that I have this part in drawing, I can hit save and check in. Just like I did before earlier with the Cosmos files, I can click find and include associated drawings, and it will look through the folders where I've been saving everything, which is automatically Baja Scratch for me, and it'll find that drawing file. Once it's found the drawing, you can see that it shows up indented underneath the part file, which is how it'll show up in this structure. For regular checking in, I can pick a location and then move forward like that. Once drawings are in PDM with parts, this is how they show up. If we go to reduction, input shaft assembly, in input shaft you can see there's several drawings here. The input shaft in particular has multiple drawings associated with it. So I have the part number, then I have underscore hob, heat treat, and grind, and underscore turn modification. These are because there's two different drawings that I made depending on which process it was. You can add as many drawings as you need to. The last attachment note is, let's say you don't have the CAD file of the drawing, but you do have a PDF of a drawing from a previous year. That's the case for me with R14. So if I go to the driveline for R14, and I go to the output shaft assembly, I've got the output shaft. I have a PDF drawing that I would like it to put into PDM so that future designers can reference it, but it's not actually a SolidWorks drawing part, it's just a PDF file. If I right click on the part file and I click check in from disk, then I find the part that I actually want. I've got the shaft, grind, and shape, and the turned PDF files. And I click that. Because I was selected the R14 output shaft when I went to check the part in, it'll automatically ask me if I want to add it as an attachment to the document. I'm going to hit yes. You'll see the same exact thing with the regular drawing. I can check that in. It'll tell me I'm doing a new document. And then you'll see there someone in the future can reference the fact that I have this PDF located there. Besides PDFs, you can add Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, PowerPoints, emails, any other information that you think might be useful for future designers to reference. This is a really good way to tie things specifically to the part CAD files rather than buried somewhere deep within the server. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about is deleting files. As designers, we don't actually have access to the delete feature. The only thing that can delete it is if you're logged in as an admin file. We've got this random part for some reason in the driveline folder from last year. If you preview the window on it, it's some weird shaped ninja star thing. So if I want to go ahead and delete that, there's no delete option. What I can do is change the project like we saw previously. And then I'll move it to this delete me folder. And then you'll make sure I click for the scope that I've got the selected item. I can uncheck this. It's not actually a link, but by unchecking, you guarantee that you'll move it. And then I'll move it into the delete me folder. And then every once in a while, I can go in as admin in the delete me folder and empty it out of all the documents. It's just a roundabout way to let people delete folks without actually giving you the ability to accidentally delete the entire iterative assembly for the car. That's everything for advanced using of SolidWorks WPDM. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask me or any other designers. I hope this has been helpful. I'll put a link to the beginner video if you want to reference that, and then also be on the lookout soon once we have the newest CAD version. I'll have an installation video for updating to SolidWorks 2016. Thanks.